The sound of gunfire cracked through the dawn air as Daisy Johnson dove behind an overturned wagon, her heart pounding against her ribs like a wild Mustang. This wasn't how she'd imagined staking her claim in Wasco. California would begin defending the very land that rightfully belonged to her from men who believed a woman had no business owning property. It was 1876, and the dust of the frontier had barely settled across the San Joaquin Valley. Daisy had arrived 3 weeks prior with nothing but her father's weathered pocket watch, a deed to 40 acres of promising farmland, and the stubborn determination that had gotten her through 24 years of life as an orphan. "Miss Johnson." A deep voice called out from somewhere to her left. "You'd best clear out before sundown. Land office says that deed ain't worth the paper it's written on." Daisy gritted her teeth, feeling for the small revolver tucked into the folds of her skirt. Her fingers trembled slightly, but her resolve remained firm. Her father had purchased this land fair and square before his passing. She'd traveled all the way from Missouri to claim it, and she wasn't about to let some land-grabbing vultures chase her away. "The next man who steps foot on my property will get a bullet for his trouble," she shouted back, her voice steadier than she felt. The laughter that followed made her blood boil. 3 men on horseback circled at a distance, waiting her out. They'd shown up just as she'd finished driving stakes to mark her property line. One of them, a man with a scar cutting through his left eyebrow, had waved papers at her, claiming the land office had nullified her claim because a single woman couldn't file properly. When she'd refused to leave, they'd started shooting at her feet. A cloud of dust rose in the distance, drawing the attention of her harassers. A lone rider approached at a steady gallop, the silhouette growing more distinct against the California sunrise. Daisy squinted, trying to make out if this was friend or foe. The rider slowed as he neared, and she could see he sat tall in the saddle. His broad shoulders were set in a way that spoke of confidence, and the brim of his hat was pulled low over his eyes. A flash of silver caught the morning light, a sheriff's badge. "What in tarnation is going on here?" The newcomer called out, his deep voice carrying across the distance. The 3 men shifted uncomfortably on their horses. "Just explaining to this lady that she's trespassing, Sheriff," the scarred man said, trying to sound reasonable. The sheriff's horse moved closer, and Daisy caught her first clear glimpse of his face. Strong jawline covered with a day's worth of stubble, keen blue eyes that missed nothing, and a mouth set in a grim line. He couldn't have been more than 30, but there was something in those eyes that spoke of experiences beyond his years. "That right, miss?" he asked, addressing her directly, respect in his tone that the others had lacked. Daisy slowly rose from behind the wagon, keeping her hand close to her hidden weapon. "These men claim the land office has rejected my claim, Sheriff. But I have the deed right here, signed and notarized. This land belonged to my father, Jacob Johnson. He purchased it 5 years ago." The sheriff nodded once, then turned to the men. "You boys got paperwork saying otherwise." The scarred man produced a document with a flourish. "Land office says women can't claim land without a husband. It's the law." The sheriff took the paper, scanned it, then handed it back. "This just says her claim is under review, Harkins. That's a far cry from rejection." His voice hardened. "Now clear off this lady's land before I arrest you for harassment." The men grumbled but turned their horses away. The scarred man Harkins shot Daisy a look that promised this wasn't over. After they disappeared down the dusty road, the sheriff dismounted and approached her, removing his hat to reveal thick, sandy brown hair. "Sheriff Owen Carter, Miss Johnson. Sorry about that. Welcome to Wasco." Daisy felt herself relax slightly, though wariness still kept her on edge. "Thank you for your intervention, Sheriff." though I suspect they'll be back." "You can count on it," he agreed, looking around at her modest camp, a wagon, a small tent, and the beginnings of what might someday be fence posts. "If you don't mind my asking, what brings a lady like yourself out here alone?" Daisy straightened her spine. "My father believed in this land. Said it would grow anything with the right care. When he died last winter, I promised him I'd see his dream through." Something flickered in the sheriff's eyes, respect, perhaps, or understanding. "It's good land," he agreed, "but Harkins wasn't entirely wrong. The land office has been making it difficult for single women to claim property. They find all sorts of reasons to deny the paperwork. That's not right. The Homestead Act allows women to file claims. True enough, but they find loopholes." He placed his hat back on his head. "You might find yourself in a lengthy legal battle, Miss Johnson." Daisy felt frustration rise in her chest. "I don't have money for lawyers, Sheriff. I put everything into coming here and buying supplies to start working the land." Owen Carter studied her for a long moment, then looked out over the acres of potential stretching before them. The morning sun cast a golden glow over fields that could, with work, become a prosperous farm. "There might be another way," he said finally, his voice thoughtful. "The land office can't deny a married woman's claim when her husband co-signs." Daisy laughed bitterly. "Well, that's wonderful news, Sheriff. I'll just pull a husband out of thin air, shall I?" The corner of his mouth twitched upward. "I wasn't suggesting magic, Miss Johnson." He paused, seeming to consider his next words carefully. "I was suggesting marriage." Daisy stared at him, certain she had misheard. "I beg your pardon, a marriage of convenience," he clarified, suddenly looking uncomfortable with his own suggestion. "On paper only. You'd keep your land, and once it's legally secured, we could quietly dissolve the arrangement." "You're proposing to marry me? A complete stranger?" Daisy couldn't keep the incredulity from her voice. Sheriff Carter shifted his weight, looking almost boyish in his discomfort. "It wouldn't be a real marriage, Miss Johnson, just a legal maneuver to protect your property." "Why would you do that for someone you've just met?" His gaze met hers directly. "Because I've seen what happens to folks who lose their land to men like Harkins. They're vultures picking over what others have worked for, and because," he hesitated, "your father was right. This is good land. Be ashamed to see it fall into the wrong hands." Daisy studied him, searching for signs of deception or ulterior motives. But all she saw was straightforward honesty in those blue eyes. "I need to think about this," she said finally. He nodded. "Of course. But don't take too long. Harkins has friends at the land office. Once they formally reject your claim, it'll be much harder to fight." As Sheriff Carter mounted his horse to leave, Daisy called after him. "Why are you really doing this, Sheriff?" He looked back at her, the morning sun casting half his face in shadow. "Let's just say I believe in justice, Miss Johnson, and what's happening to you isn't just." With that, he tipped his hat and rode away, leaving Daisy standing amid her stakes and dreams, with a proposal she never could have imagined weighing on her mind. The following morning, Daisy hitched her wagon and made the journey into Wasco proper. The small but growing town consisted of a main street with essential businesses, a general store, a saloon, a small hotel, and, of course, the sheriff's office. She'd been in town only once before, to register her arrival and her intention to work her father's land. The sheriff's office was a modest building with a single cell visible through the front window. As Daisy tied her horse to the hitching post, she noticed several townspeople watching her with curious eyes. News traveled fast in small communities, and she suspected her confrontation with Harkins was already common knowledge. She straightened her simple blue dress, patted her hair, which was tied back in a practical knot, and entered the office with her head held high. Owen Carter sat at a desk, Paperwork spread before him. He looked up when she entered, surprise evident on his features before he quickly masked it and stood. "Miss Johnson, didn't expect to see you so soon." "I've been thinking about your proposal, Sheriff," Daisy said, getting straight to the point. "It seems unconventional." "That it is," he agreed, gesturing for her to take a seat across from his desk. "I need to understand what exactly you're offering and why." Daisy sat down, placing her hands primly in her lap. A marriage, even one in name only, is not something to enter into lightly. The sheriff leaned back in his chair, studying her. "You're right to be cautious. Here's how I see it. We signed the papers, making us legally married. I co-sign your land claim. The land office can't deny it on the grounds that you're a single woman. Once your claim is secure, which could take a few months, we quietly annul the marriage. You keep your land, I go back to my life, and nobody's the worse for it." "And what do you get out of this arrangement, Sheriff Carter?" He shifted slightly. "The satisfaction of thwarting men like Harkins, for one. That's not much of a reward for legally binding yourself to a stranger." A smile tugged at his lips. "I'm not looking for a reward, Miss Johnson." Daisy leaned forward. "Everyone wants something, Sheriff. I need to know what you want." His expression grew serious. "My father was a lot like yours, believed in the land, worked hard all his life. When he died, men like Harkins swindled my mother out of everything he built. By the time I was old enough to do anything about it, she'd worked herself into an early grave trying to keep us fed." He met Daisy's gaze directly. "So maybe I'm trying to right an old wrong, or maybe I just don't like seeing good people get taken advantage of." There was such honest emotion in his voice that Daisy found herself believing him. Still, caution made her press further. "And you truly expect nothing in return?" "No. Marital obligations." Color rose in the sheriff's cheeks. "Absolutely not. This would be a business arrangement, nothing more. You'd continue living on your land, I'd stay here in town. We'd hardly see each other except to handle paperwork." Daisy considered this. It seemed too simple, too good to be true. But what choice did she have? She thought of her father's dream, of the promise she'd made at his bedside. If this was what it took to honor that promise. "If we do this," she said slowly, "I want terms clearly established, written down." Owen nodded approvingly. "Smart thinking. We can have Mr. Caldwell at the law office draw up an agreement." "And one more condition," Daisy added. "No one can know it's not a real marriage. If word got back to the land office that we married just to secure my claim, they'd invalidate it immediately," he finished for her. "I agree. As far as anyone else is concerned, we're a genuine couple who simply had a whirlwind courtship." The reality of what they were discussing suddenly hit Daisy. She would be married on paper, at least to the man sitting across from her. A man she'd met just yesterday. "I would need to continue using Johnson for my business affairs," she said, thinking practically. "It's the name on my father's deed." "We can work that out with Caldwell," Owen assured her. "Plenty of women keep their family names for property matters even after marriage." Daisy took a deep breath. "When would we do this?" "Sooner is better. Judge Wilson comes through town every other Thursday. He'll be here tomorrow." "Tomorrow?" Daisy felt panic rise in her chest. This was all happening so fast. Owen must have sensed her anxiety. "We don't have to decide right now. Think on it overnight. But remember, Harkins won't waste any time trying to invalidate your claim." Daisy nodded, rising from her chair. "I'll let you know my decision in the morning, Sheriff." "Owen," he corrected gently. "If we're going to convince people we're married, you should probably use my given name." "Owen," she repeated, the name feeling strange on her tongue. "And I'm Daisy." He smiled, a genuine smile that transformed his serious face. "It suits you." As Daisy left the sheriff's office, her mind whirled with all the implications of what she was considering. Marriage had never been in her plans, at least not a marriage of convenience. She'd always been practical, focused on survival rather than romance. But now, walking through the dusty streets of Wasco, she found herself wondering what kind of husband Owen Carter might make. Even in a marriage that existed only on paper. The general store stood at the corner of the main street, and Daisy decided to stock up on supplies while she was in town. As she browsed the shelves, selecting flour, coffee, and ammunition for her revolver, she overheard two women talking in the next aisle. "Did you hear about that Johnson woman out on the old Miller property?" one whispered, not quite softly enough. "Claiming land all by herself without even a husband," the other replied. "It's not proper. Sheriff ran off Harkins and his boys yesterday when they tried to set her straight. Don't know why he's getting involved. Well, you know how he is about justice and all. Still, a woman needs a man's protection out here. She won't last the winter alone." Daisy gripped the sack of flour tightly, keeping her head down. The women's conversation only reinforced what she already knew: the odds were stacked against her. Without help, she might indeed lose everything. By the time she finished her shopping and headed back to her wagon, Daisy had made up her mind. A marriage of convenience to Sheriff Owen Carter might not be what she had envisioned for her life, but it was a practical solution to an immediate problem. And Daisy Johnson had always been practical. The next morning dawned crisp and clear. Daisy had spent a restless night in her tent, weighing her options and ultimately coming to the same conclusion again and again. At first light, she washed in the stream that bordered her property. Dressed in her best dress, a simple navy blue affair with a lace collar, and headed into town once more. Owen was waiting outside his office when she arrived, looking surprisingly presentable in a clean white shirt and dark vest. His usual deputy's badge had been polished to a shine. "You look like you've made a decision," he said by way of greeting. Daisy nodded, her throat suddenly dry. "I have. I'll accept your proposal." Relief crossed his features. "I've already spoken to Judge Wilson. He can see us at noon. And Mr. Caldwell has drawn up the agreement. We discussed separate living arrangements, no marital obligations, agreement to annul once your land claim is secure." "You were that confident I'd agree," he shrugged. "I was hopeful. It's the best solution for both of us." "Both of us?" she questioned. Owen looked suddenly uncomfortable. "Well, for your land situation, and for my conscience." There was something he wasn't saying, but Daisy decided not to press. They had enough complications without digging for more. "I've arranged for Mrs. Rivera and her husband to serve as witnesses," Owen continued. "She runs the hotel and they're good people, discreet." The morning passed in a blur of paperwork and preparations. Mr. Caldwell, a bespectacled man with a meticulous manner, went through their agreement line by line, making sure both parties understood the terms. When Daisy signed her name at the bottom, she felt as though she were watching someone else's hand move the pen. At precisely noon, they stood before Judge Wilson in the small town hall. Mrs. Rivera, a kindly woman with graying hair, and her husband, a quiet man with gentle eyes, stood as witnesses. The ceremony was brief and perfunctory. When Judge Wilson pronounced them husband and wife and instructed Owen that he might kiss his bride, an awkward moment passed between them. Owen solved the dilemma by taking Daisy's hand and bringing it briefly to his lips, a courtly gesture that satisfied propriety without crossing boundaries. "Congratulations to you both," Judge Wilson said, closing his book. "Marriage records will be filed with the county clerk by week's end." And just like that, Daisy Johnson became Daisy Carter, at least officially. The name felt foreign, like clothes that didn't quite fit. Mrs. Rivera insisted they come to the hotel for a small celebration lunch. "A wedding needs at least a toast," she declared. Over a simple meal of roast chicken and potatoes, Daisy found herself seated beside the man who was now legally her husband. Owen Carter was unfailingly polite, answering questions about how they had met, while investigating some trouble on her land, and how long they had known each other. Sometimes you just know right away, with enough truth to be believable without revealing their arrangement. "Where will you be living?" Mrs. Rivera asked innocently. "The sheriff's quarters behind the office are awfully small for a couple." Owen and Daisy exchanged a quick glance. "We'll be staying at Daisy's homestead," Owen answered smoothly. "More room to build a proper house there." Daisy shot him a questioning look, but he just squeezed her hand under the table, a silent request to play along. After lunch, as they stepped onto the boardwalk outside the hotel, Owen pulled her aside. "I'm sorry about the living arrangements comment. We didn't discuss that part." "No, we didn't," Daisy agreed, keeping her voice low as passers-by nodded greetings to them. News of their marriage had already spread through town like wildfire. "I assumed you'd continue living here in town." "That wouldn't look right," Owen pointed out. "A newly married couple living apart would raise questions. I think I should at least appear to be living at your homestead." Daisy hadn't considered this aspect. "My tent barely fits one person, let alone two." "I can bring my bedroll and sleep under the stars for now," he suggested. "Just until we can add a room to your wagon shelter or build something more substantial." The idea of having someone else, a man, living on her property made Daisy uneasy, even if it was just for appearance's sake. "How often would you need to be there?" she asked. "Enough to be convincing." "I could ride out in the evenings after my duties are done, leave in the mornings. People would just think I'm a dedicated sheriff." Daisy considered this. It was logical if uncomfortable. "All right," she agreed reluctantly, "but we need clear boundaries." "Of course," Owen said quickly. "I meant what I said in our agreement. This is just about protecting your land." As they parted ways, Owen to the sheriff's office to handle afternoon business, Daisy to file her updated land claim with her new marital status. Neither noticed Thomas Harkins watching from the shadows of the saloon, a calculating expression on his scarred face. Daisy spent the afternoon at the land office, where the clerk's eyebrows shot up when she presented her marriage certificate along with her claim paperwork. "Married to Sheriff Carter?" he asked, unable to hide his surprise. "When did this happen?" "Today," Daisy answered calmly, keeping her expression neutral. "Now, I believe this addresses any concerns about my ability to maintain the claim to my father's land." The clerk shuffled through her papers, clearly flustered. "Well, yes, I suppose it does. Though there are still surveying issues to be resolved. My husband and I would be happy to meet with any surveyors you need to send," Daisy said firmly. "At your earliest convenience." The word husband felt strange on her tongue, but she forced herself to say it naturally. This was, after all, why she had entered into this arrangement. By the time Daisy headed back to her homestead, the sun was beginning its descent toward the western horizon. She felt exhausted, as though she had lived a week's worth of life in a single day. When she arrived at her property, she was surprised to find Owen already there, his horse tethered near her wagon. More surprising still was what he was doing driving fence posts into the ground along her property line. "What are you doing?" she called as she approached. Owen straightened, wiping sweat from his brow. "Figured I should make myself useful while keeping up appearances." He gestured to the newly marked boundary. "You had the right idea with these stakes, but proper fence posts will make a stronger statement." Daisy dismounted, taking in the work he'd already completed. "You didn't have to do this." "Consider it a wedding present," he replied with a small smile. "Besides, if anyone's watching, and I suspect Harkins has eyes around, it sells our story better." The mention of Harkins reminded Daisy of the real reason for their arrangement. "How did things go at the land office?" Clerk seemed surprised but couldn't find any reason to deny your claim now, she reported. Though he mentioned surveying issues. Owen frowned. "That's new. Probably stalling tactics. We'll need to press them on that." The use of "we" wasn't lost on Daisy. For better or worse, they were in this situation together now. As the evening shadows lengthened, Owen helped Daisy prepare a simple dinner over a campfire. The domesticity of the scene struck Daisy as surreal 24 hours ago. She had been alone, determined to make her way without help. Now she sat across a fire from a man who was legally her husband, discussing fence construction and land office politics. "I've been thinking about your housing situation," Owen said as they finished their meal of beans and bacon. "A tent isn't adequate with winter coming." "I was planning to build a shelter before the weather turns," Daisy replied. "Something simple to get through until spring when I can start on a proper cabin." Owen nodded thoughtfully. "I know some men in town who could help, good carpenters who owe me favors. I can't afford to pay workers yet. They'd work for meals and the promise of help when they need it." "That's how things get done out here." Daisy hesitated. She had always prided herself on self-reliance. Accepting Owen's help with the land claim was one thing, it was a legal necessity, but this felt different. "I need to do this myself," she said finally. "It's important to me." Owen studied her across the fire, the flames casting shadows across his face. "Independence matters to you." "It's all I've ever had," she admitted. "After my mother died, it was just my father and me, and when I lost him." She swallowed hard. "I learned early that depending on others is a luxury I couldn't afford." "There's a difference between dependence and cooperation," Owen said gently. "No one makes it alone out here, Daisy. Even the most self-sufficient homesteader needs neighbors sometimes." His words held wisdom, but years of self-reliance weren't easy to set aside. "I'll think about it," she conceded. As darkness fell completely, the awkwardness of their situation became apparent. Owen set up his bedroll a respectful distance from her tent, near enough to the dying fire to catch its warmth. "I'll be gone before sunrise," he told her as they prepared to retire for the night. "Deputy Douglas can handle things in town for a few hours, but I should be there when folks start their day." Daisy nodded, relieved that he understood the need for discretion. "Thank you for everything today." "You do the same in my position," he said simply. As Daisy lay in her tent that night, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of another person moving around her camp, she wondered what she had gotten herself into. Marriage, even one that existed only on paper, was a far cry from the independent life she had envisioned. And yet, for the first time since arriving in Wasco, she fell asleep without fear that someone would try to drive her from her land while she slept. True to his word, Owen was gone when Daisy emerged from her tent at dawn. The only signs of his presence were the neatly rolled bedroll stashed behind her wagon and a pot of coffee already brewing over a freshly built morning fire. Over the next week, they fell into an uneasy routine. Owen would arrive as dusk fell, bringing news from town and often supplies nails for building, seeds for planting, once even a young apple tree that he helped her plant near where she planned to build her cabin. During the days, Daisy worked her land, preparing the soil for spring planting and continuing to build a more substantial shelter before winter arrived. The work was backbreaking, but she welcomed the physical exhaustion. It left her less time to dwell on the strangeness of her situation. Word of their marriage had spread throughout the county. Occasionally, neighbors would ride by, ostensibly to introduce themselves but really to catch a glimpse of the woman who had so quickly captured the sheriff's heart. Daisy played her part well, speaking fondly of Owen and their whirlwind courtship. On the 7th day of their arrangement, Daisy was splitting logs for her shelter when she saw a cloud of dust on the road. 3 riders approached Thomas Harkins and 2 men she didn't recognize. She set down her axe and moved her hand to the revolver she now wore openly at her hip. Owen had insisted she keep it with her at all times when he wasn't present. "Mrs. Carter," Harkins called as they drew near, the title dripping with sarcasm. "Or do you still prefer Johnson?" "What do you want, Harkins?" Daisy demanded, standing her ground. The men stopped their horses at the edge of her property, just beyond the fence posts Owen had installed. Harkins smiled, but the expression didn't reach his eyes. "Just being neighborly. Wanted to congratulate you on your hasty marriage." His gaze swept over her property. "Convenient timing, wouldn't you say?" "I don't see how my personal life is any of your concern," Daisy replied coolly. "It becomes my concern when you use trickery to steal land that should rightfully go to those who can work it properly." Harkins leaned forward in his saddle. "A woman playing at being a farmer, married to a sheriff who's never home. It's plain as day what you're doing." "My husband will be interested to hear about this visit," Daisy said, her finger resting near the trigger of her revolver. One of Harkins' companions, a weaselly-looking man with a patchy beard, snickered. "Your husband is currently handling a disturbance 2 counties over. Won't be back till late tonight, I reckon." The implication was clear. They had deliberately waited until Owen was far from Wasco to make their move. "That's far enough," came a voice from behind Daisy. She turned to see Mrs. Rivera's husband, Manuel, approaching with a shotgun in his hands. Behind him were 2 other men from neighboring farms, similarly armed. "Mrs. Carter sent word that she might need some neighborly assistance today," Manuel explained, coming to stand beside Daisy. "Sheriff asked us to keep an eye out while he was attending to business elsewhere." Harkins' confident expression faltered slightly. He hadn't counted on Daisy having allies. "We were just leaving," he said after a moment, tugging his horse's reins. "But this isn't over, Mrs. Carter, not by a long shot." After the 3 men had ridden away, Daisy turned to Manuel and the others. "Thank you, but I never sent for help." Manuel smiled kindly. "Sheriff Carter arranged it before he left this morning, said you might have unwelcome visitors while he was gone." Daisy felt a surge of gratitude mixed with irritation. Owen had anticipated trouble and arranged protection without telling her. Part of her appreciated his foresight. Another part bristled at not being consulted. The men stayed for a while, helping Daisy with the heavier work of shelter building before returning to their own farms. By the time Owen returned that evening, she had made significant progress on the small cabin. "I heard about Harkins' visit," he said as he dismounted, looking tired from his long day. "Manuel sent word to me." "You arranged for protection without telling me," Daisy said, unable to keep the accusation from her voice. Owen sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I suspected Harkins might try something while I was away. He has eyes and ears all over the county. I can take care of myself." "Against 3 armed men," Owen challenged. "That's not self-reliance, Daisy. That's foolishness." His words stung because they contained truth. Daisy turned away, focusing on the partially built wall of her shelter. "You still should have told me." "You're right," Owen conceded, moving to help her with a heavy beam. "I should have. I'm sorry." His easy apology caught Daisy off guard. She had expected argument, not acknowledgement. "Thank you," she said after a moment, "for the apology and for arranging help." They worked together in companionable silence as the sun set, making more progress on the shelter than Daisy could have achieved alone. When they finally stopped for the night, both were exhausted but satisfied with their work. Over a simple dinner, Owen shared news from his trip to the neighboring county. "The land office is sending a surveyor next week," he mentioned. "I made sure to impress upon them the importance of resolving your claim quickly." "Our claim," Daisy corrected automatically, then paused, surprised by her own words. "I mean, legally speaking." Owen nodded, but something flickered in his eyes, something Daisy couldn't quite identify. "There's something else," he said after a moment. "Harkins has filed a complaint with the county, claiming our marriage is fraudulent." Daisy felt her heart sink. "Can he do that?" "He can try, but without evidence it won't go anywhere." Owen set aside his plate. "Still, we need to be careful, more careful than we have been." "What do you mean?" "I mean we need to be more convincing as a married couple. People are starting to notice I never stay the night, that I'm always gone by dawn." The implication hung in the air between them. "You're suggesting," Daisy began, then faltered, "that I need to be seen here more often, during daylight hours, that we need to act like a real married couple when in public." Owen's voice was matter-of-fact, but Daisy could see discomfort in his expression. This wasn't any easier for him than it was for her. "I see," she said finally. "What does that entail exactly?" "Nothing inappropriate," he assured her quickly. "Just small things, the way we speak to each other, being seen together in town. Perhaps you could bring me lunch at the office occasionally, as a wife might do." It all sounded reasonable, but it also meant deeper entanglement in their charade. The lines between their arrangement and reality would blur further. "All right," Daisy agreed reluctantly. "I can do that." Owen seemed relieved. "Thank you. I know this isn't what you wanted." "Nor you," she pointed out. He looked at her for a long moment across the fire. "It's not as bad as I might have expected, being married to you." The unexpected compliment brought warmth to Daisy's cheeks. "I suppose there are worse husbands I could have chosen for convenience's sake." Owen's laugh was genuine, and for a moment the awkwardness between them dissolved. They were just two people, sharing a fire under the vast California sky. That night, as Daisy lay in her tent listening to the familiar sounds of Owen preparing for sleep outside, she found herself wondering what a real marriage to someone like him might be like. The thought surprised her and she pushed it away firmly. This was a business arrangement, nothing more. In a few months, once her claim was secure, they would go their separate ways. She ignored the small pang she felt at that thought and forced herself to sleep. The land office surveyor arrived the following week, a thin, precise man named Elkins who measured everything twice and made copious notes. Owen took the day off from his sheriff duties to be present, playing the role of proud husband showing off their property. "Planning to grow wheat primarily?" Elkins asked as they walked the boundaries. "And some vegetables for our own use," Owen replied, his hand resting casually on the small of Daisy's back. The gesture was for show, but it sent an unexpected shiver up her spine. "Good soil here," the surveyor noted. "With proper irrigation from that stream, you could have a productive farm within a year or two." "That's our hope," Daisy said, conscious of the hour and how natural it was beginning to sound. "My father always said this land had potential." Elkins nodded, making another note. "Well, everything seems in order with your boundaries. No encroachment issues with neighboring properties. I'll submit my report to the land office by week's end." As the surveyor packed up his equipment, he paused. "One more thing, there's been some question about the timing of your marriage relative to the land claim." Daisy felt Owen tense beside her. "Is that relevant to the survey?" Owen asked, his tone carefully neutral. "Not directly, no," Elkins admitted. "But the land office has asked me to verify that you both reside on the property, part of establishing valid occupancy. As you can see, we're building our home right here." Owen gestured to the half-constructed cabin. "Where else would we live?" The surveyor nodded, seemingly satisfied. "Of course. Just doing my job, Sheriff. Congratulations on your marriage, by the way. Mrs. Rivera at the hotel speaks very highly of you both." After Elkins departed, Daisy released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "That was close." "Too close," Owen agreed. "Harkins is pushing the land office to investigate us." "What do we do?" Owen looked at the cabin they'd been building. "We finish this, make it clear we're establishing a permanent home here, and—" He hesitated. "And what?" Daisy prompted. "And I think I need to move in properly. Not just for appearances, but to establish legal residence." The idea of sharing the small cabin with Owen, even with separate sleeping areas, made Daisy's pulse quicken. "Is that really necessary?" "I'm afraid so, at least until your claim is finalized." He must have seen the concern on her face because he quickly added, "I'll build a partition. You'll have your privacy." Daisy considered their options and found they were limited. If the land office determined their marriage was solely for the purpose of securing the claim, they could void everything, not just the marriage, but her right to the land itself. "All right," she agreed finally. "But we stick to our agreement. This is still just an arrangement." Owen nodded, though something in his expression suggested he was troubled. "Of course." They worked with renewed urgency over the next few days, completing the basic structure of the cabin. It was modest, a single room with a fireplace, but solid enough to withstand the coming winter. Owen, true to his word, built a partition that divided the space into two small areas. The night Owen officially moved in, bringing his few possessions from town and explaining to curious neighbors that he was finally able to arrange for Deputy Douglas to handle more responsibilities, was awkward for both of them. They moved carefully around each other, hyper-aware of the other's presence in the confined space. "I can still sleep outside if you'd prefer," Owen offered as they prepared for their first night under the same roof. Daisy shook her head. "People talk." If someone happened by and saw the sheriff sleeping outside while his wife was in the cabin. "Right." Owen ran a hand through his hair, a gesture Daisy had come to recognize as a sign of his discomfort. "Well, good night then." "Good night," Daisy replied, retreating behind the partition to her narrow bed. Sleep was elusive that night. Every sound from the other side of the partition, a shifting of weight, a deep breath, reminded Daisy that she was no longer alone. It was both comforting and disconcerting. In the morning, they established a routine that allowed them to share the space while maintaining appropriate boundaries. Owen would rise first, build the fire, and prepare coffee before heading into town. Daisy would work the land during the day, and Owen would return in the evening to help with construction projects or heavier farm work. To anyone watching, they appeared to be a hard-working young couple establishing their homestead. In private, they maintained a careful distance, always conscious of the temporary nature of their arrangement. But as days turned into weeks, something began to shift. Small moments of connection accumulated: a shared laugh over dinner, the brush of hands as they passed tools to each other, conversations that extended beyond practical matters into personal histories and hopes for the future. Daisy learned that Owen had a younger sister in San Francisco, that he'd become a lawman after seeing too much injustice during his youth, that he preferred coffee to tea but would drink either gratefully on a cold morning. Owen discovered that Daisy could identify dozens of wild plants and their uses, that she taught herself to read from her father's books, that she hummed softly when she thought no one was listening. On a crisp October morning, with the sun rising golden over the fields, Daisy emerged from behind the partition to find Owen had already prepared breakfast. Not just coffee and hardtack, but proper flapjacks with preserved berries he'd traded for in town. "What's the occasion?" she asked, surprised by the effort, Owen smiled, looking slightly embarrassed. It's been a month today, since we were married, I mean. The fact that he had remembered caught Daisy off guard. I hadn't realized. I thought we might celebrate, in a manner of speaking. He gestured to the modest spread. It's not much, but it's wonderful, Daisy said honestly, touched by the gesture. Thank you. They ate together at the small table Owen had crafted, the morning sunlight streaming through the cabin's single window. For a moment, Daisy could almost forget that theirs was a marriage of convenience rather than choice. The land office sent word yesterday, Owen mentioned as they finished eating. Your claim has been formally registered. There's still a 6-month residency requirement to fulfill, but the major hurdles have been cleared. Daisy felt a surge of relief and triumph. That's wonderful news, it is, Owen agreed, though something in his tone seemed reserved. Another few months, and we can proceed with the annulment as planned. The reminder of their arrangement's temporary nature landed like a stone in Daisy's stomach. She had become so accustomed to their daily routine, to Owen's presence in her life, that the thought of returning to solitude was suddenly less appealing than it once had been. Yes, she said, forcing brightness into her voice. Everything is proceeding as planned. Later that day, as Daisy worked in the small vegetable garden she'd started near the cabin, she found her thoughts continually drifting to Owen, to the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled, to the gentle consideration he showed in 100 small ways, to how his presence had come to feel right somehow in a way she couldn't quite explain. These thoughts troubled her. Developing genuine feelings for Owen Carter would complicate everything. Their arrangement was meant to be temporary, practical. Emotions would only make the inevitable separation more difficult. That evening, when Owen returned from town, he brought news that drove all other concerns from Daisy's mind. Harkins and his men were arrested today, he announced as he entered the cabin. Caught them attempting to forge land documents at the county office. Daisy stopped stirring the stew she was preparing. Arrested? By you. By the federal marshal, actually. Turns out Harkins has been running this scheme across 3 counties, using intimidation and fraud to drive legitimate claimants off their land, then acquiring it himself through strawman buyers. Relief washed over Daisy. So he won't be troubling us anymore. Not for a long while, at least. He's facing serious charges. Owen hung his hat on the peg by the door, a small gesture that had become so familiar it made Daisy's heart ache. Your land is safe now, truly safe. The implications of this development hung in the air between them. With Harkins no longer a threat and the land claim proceeding normally, the primary reason for their arrangement was effectively resolved. I suppose this changes things, Daisy said carefully. Owen nodded, his expression unreadable. I suppose it does. Though technically, we still need to maintain the appearance of a genuine marriage until the residency requirement is met. Of course, Daisy agreed quickly. That makes sense. An awkward silence fell between them, heavier than any they had experienced since the beginning of their arrangement. Daisy, Owen began, then hesitated. I've been thinking. A sudden pounding on the door interrupted whatever he had been about to say. Owen frowned, moving to answer it. Manuel Rivera stood outside, his expression grave. Sheriff, you're needed in town. There's been a shooting at the saloon. Owen grabbed his hat. Anyone hurt? One man dead, another wounded. Deputy Douglas has the shooter in custody, but there's a crowd gathering. Could turn ugly. I'll be right there. Owen turned to Daisy. I'm sorry, we'll talk when I return. And then he was gone, leaving Daisy with the unsettling feeling that something important had almost been said, something that might have changed everything. The shooting incident kept Owen in town for 2 days. When he finally returned to the cabin, exhausted from handling the investigation and calming the town's tensions. Whatever moment had been building between them seemed to have passed. They fell back into their routine, but something had shifted. A new awareness existed between them, unspoken but palpable. Daisy found herself noticing the way Owen's hands moved as he worked, the timbre of his voice when he spoke of things that mattered to him, the thoughtful expression he wore when he believed she wasn't looking. For his part, Owen seemed to find more reasons to return to the cabin during the day, bringing lunch he'd picked up in town, checking on a repair he'd made to the roof, delivering mail that could easily have waited until evening. On a cold November afternoon, with the first hint of winter in the air, Daisy decided to visit Owen at his office in town. She had baked bread that morning and thought he might appreciate a warm loaf and some company for lunch, all part of maintaining their appearance as a happily married couple, she told herself. The sheriff's office was quiet when she arrived. Deputy Douglas nodded a greeting, explaining that Owen was meeting with Judge Wilson but would return shortly. Daisy settled in to wait, placing her basket on Owen's desk. As she sat there, she noticed a letter lying open among his papers. She wouldn't have given it a second glance, except that her name caught her eye. Guilt immediately followed curiosity, but not before she had read enough to understand that Owen had been corresponding with a lawyer in Sacramento about their annulment. Daisy felt as though the floor had dropped away beneath her. Of course, Owen was planning for the annulment that had always been their agreement. So why did seeing evidence of it in black and white make her heart constrict painfully? The door opened and Owen entered, his face lighting up when he saw her. "Daisy, this is a pleasant surprise." She managed a smile, pushing aside the unsettled feeling. "I brought lunch, freshly baked bread and some of that stew from last night." "You're a godsend," Owen said with genuine appreciation. "The meeting with Judge Wilson went longer than expected, and I'm famished." They shared the simple meal in his office, with Owen recounting town news and Daisy providing updates on the farm. It was comfortable, familiar, and Daisy suddenly realized how much she would miss these moments when their arrangement ended. "Is everything all right?" Owen asked, noticing her distraction. "You seem troubled." Daisy hesitated, then decided honesty was best. "I saw the letter on your desk." "About the annulment." Owen's expression fell. I was going to tell you about that. With Harkins no longer a threat and the claim proceeding well, I thought it prudent to understand what steps we'll need to take when the time comes." "Of course," Daisy said quickly. "That makes perfect sense." "But that doesn't mean we need to rush anything," Owen added, his eyes searching hers. "The residency requirement won't be met until spring, and Sheriff Carter," Deputy Douglas burst into the office, interrupting their conversation. "Fire at the hotel. Mrs. Rivera says it's spreading fast." Owen was on his feet immediately. "Ring the alarm bell. Get every able-bodied man with buckets to form a line from the water trough." The next few hours were chaos, as the town of Wasco fought desperately to contain the fire that had started in the hotel's kitchen. Daisy worked alongside the other women, passing buckets and tending to those overcome by smoke. Owen seemed to be everywhere at once, organizing the bucket brigades and helping to evacuate buildings in the fire's path. By nightfall, they had managed to save most of the town, though the hotel and 2 adjacent buildings were damaged beyond repair. Miraculously, no lives had been lost, but several people had suffered burns or smoke inhalation. Daisy found Owen sitting on the steps of the church, which had been converted to a temporary infirmary. His face was streaked with soot, and he cradled his right hand, which had been wrapped in a bandage. "You're hurt," she said, sitting beside him. "Just a minor burn," he dismissed. Others fared worse. Daisy gently took his injured hand, examining the bandage. "Mrs. Rivera told me what you did, how you ran back into the hotel to save old Mr. Gunderson when everyone thought he was still upstairs." Owen shrugged, clearly uncomfortable with the praise. "Anyone would have done the same." "No," Daisy said firmly. "Not anyone. It was brave, Owen." He looked at her then, really looked at her, and something passed between them, an understanding that transcended words. "The Riveras have lost everything," Owen said after a moment. "Their home, their business. Where will they stay? Judge Wilson has offered them a room for now, but rebuilding will take time and money they don't have." Daisy thought of the kind couple who had stood as witnesses at their wedding, who had sent men to protect her when Harkins threatened her land. "They can stay with us," she said without hesitation. "The cabin is small, but we could make room." Owen's expression softened. "You do that. Open your home to them." "Our home," Daisy corrected gently. "And yes, of course, that's what neighbors do, isn't it? Help each other when it's needed." Something like pride flickered in Owen's eyes. "I'll let them know." "Thank you, Daisy." That night, as they rode back to their cabin under a sky full of stars, Daisy found herself reflecting on how much had changed since she first arrived in Wasco. She had come seeking independence, determined to stand alone. Now she found herself part of a community, married to a man she admired more with each passing day, and willingly opening her home to neighbors in need. The changes frightened her, but they also felt right in a way she couldn't explain. The Riveras moved into the cabin the next day. Despite the cramped quarters, they settled in with good grace, grateful for the shelter. Manuel immediately made himself useful, helping with farm tasks and repairs, while Mrs. Rivera, who insisted Daisy call her Alina, took over much of the cooking and household management. "You have built a good life here," Alina commented one afternoon as she and Daisy worked together, preserving vegetables from the garden. "A strong home, fertile land, a good husband." Daisy smiled, though the compliment brought a pang of guilt. Alina didn't know their marriage was merely an arrangement. "I've been fortunate," she said carefully. Alina's knowing eyes studied her. "More than fortune, I think. I see how he looks at you when you don't notice." Daisy nearly dropped the jar she was filling. "I'm not sure what you mean." "The sheriff. He watches you with his heart in his eyes." Alina's smile was gentle. "And you watch him the same way, though perhaps you don't realize it yet." "We've only been married a few months," Daisy deflected, her cheeks warming. "Time means little in matters of the heart," Alina said with the confidence of long experience. "Manuel and I knew within a week that we would spend our lives together. 40 years later, I have never doubted that knowledge." Daisy didn't know how to respond. She couldn't confess the truth of her marriage to Alina, yet the woman's observations had struck too close to feelings Daisy had been trying to ignore. That evening, when Owen returned from town, Daisy found herself watching him with new awareness. The way he thanked Alina for the meal. How he listened attentively to Manuel's suggestions about winter preparations for the farm. The gentle way he inquired about Daisy's day. Was Alina right? Did Owen look at her differently when he thought she wouldn't notice? More importantly, what did Daisy want to be true? The question haunted her as November gave way to December, and preparations for Christmas occupied the small household. Alina insisted they needed a proper celebration, especially after the tragedy of the fire. "We have much to be thankful for," she declared. "A roof over our heads, good friends, and hope for the future. The hotel will be rebuilt by spring, Manuel, and I have secured a loan from the bank, but this Christmas, we celebrate together as family." The word family resonated with Daisy in unexpected ways. After losing her parents, she had resigned herself to solitude. Now she found herself surrounded by people who cared for her, in a home filled with warmth despite the winter cold outside. On Christmas Eve, with the cabin decorated with pine boughs and handmade ornaments, Owen pulled Daisy aside as Alina and Manuel prepared dinner. "I have something for you," he said, producing a small package wrapped in brown paper. "I wanted to give it to you privately." Daisy took the package, surprised by the weight of it. "You didn't need to get me anything." "I wanted to," Owen insisted. "Open it." Inside was a beautiful leather-bound journal, its cover tooled with an intricate design of wildflowers. "Owen, it's lovely," she breathed, running her fingers over the soft leather. "I noticed you writing sometimes in the evenings," he explained. "On scraps of paper or the backs of seed catalogs. I thought you might like something proper to write in." The thoughtfulness of the gift touched Daisy deeply. Owen had noticed this small, private habit of hers, her way of processing her thoughts at the end of each day, and had sought to support it. "I have something for you too," she admitted, retrieving a package from her side of the partition. "It's not much." Owen unwrapped the gift carefully, a hand-knitted scarf in deep blue wool that had taken Daisy weeks to complete in secret moments. "You made this?" he asked, genuine wonder in his voice. Daisy nodded, suddenly shy. "Alina taught me how. I've never been much good at needlework, but—" "It's perfect," Owen said, immediately wrapping it around his neck. "No one has made me anything by hand since my mother died." The vulnerable admission made Daisy's heart ache. Without thinking, she reached up and adjusted the scarf, her fingers lingering near his collar. Owen caught her hand in his, holding it gently. "Daisy," he began, his voice low. "There's something I need to tell you. Dinner is ready," Alina called from the main room, breaking the moment. Owen released Daisy's hand with obvious reluctance. "We should join them." "Yes," Daisy agreed, though part of her desperately wanted to hear what he had been about to say. "We should." Christmas dinner was a joyful affair, with Manuel producing a bottle of wine he'd been saving for a special occasion. They toasted to health, to the rebuilding of the hotel, to friendship and new beginnings. As the evening progressed, Alina insisted they sing carols, her rich voice filling the small cabin with warmth and nostalgia. Later, as Daisy prepared for bed behind the partition, she could hear Owen and Manuel talking softly by the fire. Their voices were too low to make out the words, but the cadence was serious, confidential. The next morning, Manuel announced that he and Alina would be moving to temporary rooms above the general store, which the owner had offered at reduced rent. "We've imposed on your hospitality long enough," he explained over breakfast. "Besides, being in town will make it easier to oversee the hotel reconstruction." "You're welcome to stay," Daisy protested, though part of her recognized the strain their presence put on the small living space. "You two need your privacy," Alina said with a meaningful look that made Daisy blush. "Young couples should not have old folks underfoot constantly." Owen didn't argue as forcefully as Daisy might have expected, merely ensuring the Riveras had everything they needed for the move. By evening, the cabin felt strangely empty without their presence. "It's quiet," Daisy observed as she and Owen sat by the fire after dinner. "Too quiet?" Owen asked, watching her carefully. She considered the question. "Different. I've grown used to having them here." "They're good people," Owen agreed, but Alina was right about one thing. "What's that?" His eyes met hers across the fire. "We haven't had much privacy." The simple statement hung in the air between them, laden with unspoken implications. Daisy felt her pulse quicken. "Owen," she began hesitantly. "Yesterday, before dinner, you were about to tell me something." He nodded, setting aside the cup of coffee he'd been nursing. "I was, and it's past time I said it." He took a deep breath. "Daisy, I know our arrangement was meant to be temporary. A solution to a problem, nothing more. But for me, it's become something else entirely. Daisy held her breath, afraid to hope for what his words might mean. "I've fallen in love with you," Owen said simply. "Not as part of our charade, not for appearance's sake, but truly, completely. I love your determination, your kindness, the way you hum when you think no one is listening. I love watching you build something from nothing on this land." Tears pricked at Daisy's eyes. "Owen, please, let me finish," he requested gently. "I understand if you don't feel the same way. Our agreement was clear, and I'll honor it if you still wish to proceed with the annulment in spring. But I needed you to know that, for me, this stopped being pretend a long time ago." The vulnerability in his eyes, the raw honesty of his words, broke something open inside Daisy. All the feelings she had been fighting, all the moments of connection she had tried to dismiss as friendship or gratitude, came rushing to the surface. "I don't want the annulment," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Hope flickered across Owen's face. "What are you saying, Daisy?" "I'm saying that I fell in love with you too. Somewhere between fence posts and land claims and sharing coffee at dawn." She laughed softly, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I've been fighting it because I was afraid of depending on someone else, afraid of losing my independence. But loving you doesn't make me weaker. Somehow it makes me stronger." Owen moved from his chair to kneel before her, taking her hands in his. "Are you certain? Because once we decide this is real, I don't ever want to let you go." In answer, Daisy leaned forward and pressed her lips to his, their first kiss, sweet and tentative at first, then deepening with all the feelings they had kept contained for months. When they finally parted, Owen's smile was radiant. "Does this mean I can move my bedroll to your side of the partition?" Daisy laughed, joy bubbling up inside her. "I think that can be arranged, Sheriff Carter." That night, they truly became husband and wife, their legal arrangement transforming into a union of heart and soul. As snow began to fall outside, blanketing their land in pristine white, Daisy and Owen held each other close, marveling at how what had begun as a practical solution had become the greatest gift of their lives. Spring arrived with a burst of wildflowers across the rolling hills surrounding Wasco. The hotel reconstruction was nearly complete, the town having rallied around the Riveras with donations of labor and materials. New settlers had arrived with the warmer weather, drawn by stories of fertile land and a welcoming community. On their small farm, Daisy and Owen had been busy planting their first full-crop wheat in the larger fields, vegetables in the expanded garden near the cabin. They had added a proper bedroom to the structure during the winter months, with help from neighbors who seemed to instinctively understand that their marriage had evolved from arrangement to genuine partnership. One warm April morning, as Daisy worked in her garden, a rider approached from town. She recognized him as one of the clerks from the land office. "Mrs. Carter," he called, dismounting, "I have papers for you and the sheriff to sign. Final confirmation of your land claim." Daisy straightened, brushing soil from her hands. "Already?" "I thought we had another month of residency to complete." "The requirement was waived," the clerk explained, handing her an official-looking envelope. "Given your improvements to the property and, personal circumstances." "Personal circumstances," Daisy repeated, confused. The clerk's ears reddened slightly. "Judge Wilson thought it appropriate, considering your condition." Understanding dawned, and Daisy's hand moved instinctively to her abdomen, where the first subtle signs of her pregnancy had begun to show. She and Owen had shared the news only with Alina and Manuel thus far, planning to make a wider announcement once the first delicate months had passed. "News travels fast in a small town," she observed with a wry smile. "Yes, madam," the clerk agreed. "Congratulations, by the way, on both counts." After he departed, Daisy sat on the porch step, opening the envelope with trembling fingers. There it was in black and white, official confirmation that the land was theirs, recognized fully by the United States government. The Johnson homestead, now the Carter farm. When Owen returned from town that evening, she showed him the papers. "It's finally official," she said as they stood together, looking out over their land in the golden light of sunset. "No more uncertainty." Owen wrapped his arms around her from behind, his hands resting gently over the slight swell of her stomach. "How does it feel to know it's truly yours?" "Ours," Daisy corrected, leaning back against his chest. "And it feels right, like everything has fallen into place exactly as it should." "Even though this isn't what you planned when you first arrived?" Owen asked, a hint of teasing in his voice. A stubborn, independent woman who needed no one, Daisy turned in his arms to face him. "Especially because of that. I came here seeking independence, but I found something better: partnership. With you, with this community." She placed her hand over his heart. "I haven't lost my independence, Owen. I've just learned that being strong doesn't mean being alone." He kissed her then, tender and reverent. "Have I told you today that I love you, Daisy Carter?" "You have," she smiled against his lips, "but I don't mind hearing it again." As the sun sank below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Daisy thought about how far they had come from a desperate arrangement to save her land to a love that had saved them both in ways neither could have imagined. The land office had tried to deny her claim, and a cowboy had married her so it would stand. But what had begun as convenience had blossomed into the deepest kind of love, one built on respect, partnership, and the shared dream of creating something lasting on the land they both cherished. In the distance, the lights of Wasco began to twinkle as darkness fell. Their neighbors, their community, their home. And in Daisy's heart, a certainty that whatever challenges the future might bring, she and Owen would face them together, two people who had found in each other exactly what they hadn't known they were searching for.